That road is compromised, sir.
We push through the woods regardless.
Movement on the eastern ridge, sir. Heavy armor.
How many tanks? Are the others in position?
The objective is 2 clicks north. We push through the fog now. Hold the line. Move out.
We are here, near the river crossing.
The ice will hold the trucks. We must move faster.
The snow complicates the northern approach.
What about the ridgeline, Comrade Colonel?
Too exposed. We move here.
Watch out! Movement ahead!
January 17th, 1943. Dawn breaks over a frozen, fog-shrouded forest in Eastern Europe. Snow crunches beneath the boots of the 45th Infantry Division as they advance in uneasy silence. Frosted breaths curl in the frigid air. The division's commander unfolds a tattered map, edges worn, ink smudged from days of handling. Every line, every contour becomes a lifeline. One misread symbol could mean disaster. From the tree-line, distant artillery rattles. A grim reminder that the enemy watches, waits, and calculates. Soldiers peer over the map, squinting through frost-bitten lashes, trying to reconcile its abstract ink with the twisted reality of frozen hills and hidden ravines. Radios crackle with fragmented intelligence. Scouts whisper warnings of enemy positions that may or may not match the charted terrain. Time feels suspended. Every movement hinges on this fragile sheet of paper, a single map that could dictate life or death. One wrong decision, one misinterpreted contour line, and the fate of the entire division could unravel in minutes, swallowed by snow, steel, and fire. The map is laid. The orders are given. The march begins. January 1943 marked a grim turning point on the Eastern Front. The German Wehrmacht, stretched thin after months of attritional warfare, faced a winter unlike any in recent memory. Snowdrifts swallowed supply lines, rivers froze over, and the bitter cold clawed at exposed flesh. For the Soviet and German armies alike, the terrain was as much an enemy as the opposing division. Intelligence and reconnaissance were paramount. The ability to read maps, to interpret aerial photographs, to anticipate ambushes, often decided survival. The 45th Infantry Division had been deployed to a sector near the Donets River, a strategic corridor that linked supply routes with key industrial centers. Their mission was straightforward on paper: secure the forested high ground and prevent a flanking maneuver by an advancing German panzer detachment. Yet the simplicity of orders masked a landscape that was anything but simple. Frozen ravines twisted like veins through dense woods, and shallow depressions concealed enemy patrols and machine gun nests. In this environment, even seasoned officers had to rely almost entirely on maps and local intelligence. Maps in World War II were not mere references, they were lifelines. Cartographers had labored for months, combining aerial reconnaissance with captured intelligence, attempting to produce charts accurate enough to guide entire divisions. Yet wartime constraints meant that maps were often outdated or incomplete. A single contour misrepresented could redirect troops into a kill zone. The 45th Infantry Division's assigned map, hand-delivered from headquarters, was considered reliable, but reliability in wartime was a fragile illusion. Commanders understood that a division's fate depended not only on firepower, but on maneuver. The German doctrine of Auftragstaktik emphasized decentralized decision-making, giving company leaders the freedom to react, but only if they could correctly interpret terrain and intelligence. In the snow-choked forests near the Donets, this freedom became a double-edged sword. Scouts reported conflicting positions of enemy units. Aerial photographs were blurred by frost and cloud cover. Officers pored over maps late into the night, tracing lines of advance, estimating distances, calculating potential ambush points. Every coordinate, every bend in a river, every ridge line carried weight. Communication was another challenge. Field radios were temperamental in sub-zero temperatures, and telegraph lines frequently snapped under ice and frost. Messages had to be relayed by runners who risked frostbite and enemy fire. For the 45th Division, the map became more than a tool. It was the backbone of coordination. Artillery units relied on it for targeting, engineers depended on it to identify fords and bridges, and infantry platoons used it to navigate dense forest paths. A misread feature could isolate a unit, leaving them exposed to the enemy. Morale hinged on trust in leadership and intelligence. Soldiers had endured months of grueling combat. The harsh winter had already claimed lives and sapped strength. Confidence in the map translated into confidence in orders. Officers briefed men with precision, emphasizing key landmarks and rally points. Yet whispers of skepticism circulated among the ranks. Rumors of faulty reconnaissance, missing bridges, or undiscovered minefields fed a quiet tension. Each soldier understood, in the pit of their stomachs, that the map on the commander's desk was more than paper. It could be the thin line between survival and annihilation. Strategically, the region held immense importance. Control of the high ground in these forests would allow the occupying division to dominate the surrounding valley, influencing the movement of both friendly and enemy forces. Intelligence reports indicated that German armored units were planning flanking maneuvers along concealed tracks. The 45th Infantry Division was tasked with not only holding their position, but anticipating and countering these moves. A misstep could trigger a collapse of the entire sector, allowing enemy forces to penetrate deeper into Soviet lines. By the morning of January 17th, the division had reached the edge of the forest. Snow lay thick and undisturbed, masking the hidden dangers beneath. The map, carefully folded, would now guide every step of the coming engagement. Officers convened to finalize orders. Every coordinate, ridge, and stream had been cross-checked. Still, even as the men prepared, the cold gnawed at their bodies and nerves alike. The stage was set. The soldiers would soon discover that the map in their hands, trusted, meticulously drawn, and yet imperfect, was about to determine not only the success of the mission, but the survival of the division itself. The forest near the Donets was a labyrinth. Snow-laden branches bent low, concealing narrow paths and shallow ravines. Every step carried risk. Mines camouflaged by snow, and hidden machine gun emplacements threatened sudden death. The division's reconnaissance teams had mapped much of the area, but even the most thorough reports left gaps. Fog rolled across the hills each morning, turning familiar landmarks into phantom shapes. In such conditions, even a small map error could magnify into catastrophe. Supply lines were stretched thin. Fuel and ammunition convoys struggled through snow-choked roads. Food and medical supplies arrived sporadically, often hours or days behind schedule. The division relied on frozen rivers for transport, but ice could crack under the weight of heavy vehicles. Engineers worked tirelessly to maintain bridges and clear pathways, guided primarily by the division's map. One misjudged contour could misdirect a convoy into a concealed ravine, severing the lifeline of the frontline units. The division's command hierarchy was tense but disciplined. Colonel Viktor Petrov, a veteran of Eastern Front campaigns, understood that battlefield success depended as much on accurate intelligence as on troop courage. His staff pored over the map late into the night, tracing every route, estimating distances, calculating probable enemy positions. Patrols were sent ahead to confirm features and mark hazards, yet reports frequently conflicted. Snow obscured tracks. Frozen rivers shifted and cracked. The map remained the only unifying reference, a shared understanding of terrain, objectives, and risk. Enemy movements added another layer of uncertainty. German units in the sector were known for rapid, flexible maneuvers. Reconnaissance indicated that small armored groups were advancing through side valleys, aiming to bypass fortified positions. Artillery units monitored these movements, but visibility was limited. Radio communication with forward scouts was intermittent, often delayed by snow and interference. The map, in this context, became the bridge between observation and action. Without it, coordination would collapse. Even minor details could determine life or death. A ridge misidentified as accessible terrain could funnel troops into a crossfire. A river bend omitted from aerial reconnaissance could block retreat or resupply. Soldiers memorized the map's lines and symbols, carrying them in their minds as much as on paper. Commanders stressed redundancy. Troop leaders repeated coordinates aloud. Scouts marked landmarks, and engineers annotated paths. Yet the harsh winter made each annotation temporary. Ink froze, pencils broke, and paper tore under cold, wet gloves. The men of the 45th Infantry Division were acutely aware of what was at stake. Morale fluctuated with weather and intelligence. Units that trusted their map and their leadership advanced with purpose. Those who doubted faltered, hesitant to move across the unseen dangers of the forest. The map dictated rhythm, pace, and confidence. Every morning briefing began with a review of the terrain, the objectives, and the hazards. Soldiers studied it intently, knowing that a single misread line could isolate a platoon, leaving it vulnerable to encirclement or ambush. As the day of the operation approached, the tension intensified. Scouts confirmed enemy positions along predicted axes, yet some reported discrepancies with the official map. These inconsistencies were small. Half a kilometer here, a minor bend there. But in dense winter forest, even a minor error could become fatal. Commanders debated whether to trust the map or adjust based on scout reports. Ultimately, they chose caution, following the charted routes while sending patrols to verify landmarks in real time. By noon on January 17th, the division was positioned at the edge of the forest's high ground. Snow glimmered in the pale sun, masking hidden dangers beneath its pristine surface. The map lay on the commander's table, its inked lines the most reliable guide they had. Troops readied themselves, checking weapons, rations, and radios. Every officer knew that the upcoming advance would test not only the men's courage, but the accuracy of the intelligence they relied on. The stage was set. The map, trusted yet fallible, would now dictate the movement of thousands. Every decision, every step would hinge upon its contours. In the next hours, this fragile sheet of paper would determine whether the division would succeed, survive, or be lost to the wintered forest and the waiting enemy. For the soldiers of the 45th Infantry Division, the map was more than a piece of paper. It was an extension of their senses, a mental compass guiding every cautious step through the snow-laden forest. Frostbite had already claimed fingers and toes among the less fortunate, and exhaustion weighed heavily on those who had marched for days. Each man knew that survival depended not only on skill and courage, but on understanding the lines, ridges, and streams inked onto that fragile sheet. Private Ivan Morozov, a 20-year-old rifleman, had memorized the key landmarks. A frozen creek at 500 meters, a ridge veiled in mist to the east, a narrow path flanked by dense thickets. To him, the map was reassurance, a tangible connection to orders from headquarters he could barely hear over artillery and the whine of distant reconnaissance planes. Yet whispers ran through the ranks, stories of misplaced bridges, hidden ravines, and enemy positions that seemed absent from official charts. Morale wavered with every conflicting report, and soldiers relied as much on intuition as intelligence, reading terrain and snow tracks for signs of danger. The human cost of a misread map was immediate. A platoon diverted into a concealed gully could be surrounded in minutes. Lives depended on every officer's interpretation of inked lines and symbols. Confidence, or the lack of it, was contagious. Where trust in the map remained strong, troops moved decisively. Where doubt lingered, hesitation slowed progress, creating opportunities for the enemy. The human angle was simple yet stark. In this frozen forest, survival hinged on the fragile bond between men, leadership, and paper. The map dictated the division's maneuvers with precision. Battalion commanders plotted advances along pre-identified axes, allocating machine gun units to ridges and artillery to valleys. Snow and ice dictated pace, but the tactical framework came entirely from inked lines and coordinates. Every decision, where to deploy scouts, when to advance, which ridges to hold, was based on the map's guidance. German units in the area had established patrols and hidden anti-tank positions, expecting a conventional assault along known approaches. The map, therefore, was not merely a navigational tool, but a tactical instrument. Accurate contour lines allowed the division to identify weak points, potential ambushes, and defensible positions. Conversely, errors or omissions could funnel entire units into traps. Officers used the map to simulate enemy responses, anticipate flanking maneuvers, and coordinate artillery support. In a battlefield where every ridge, ravine, and river bend could be decisive, tactical success was inseparable from the accuracy of the map. Even small tactical adjustments relied heavily on visualizing the terrain on paper. Scouts confirmed the presence of shallow valleys and snow-covered ditches, which, though minor on the map, could impede the advance of heavy equipment. Artillery observers triangulated positions based on the map's coordinates. The division's success or failure would hinge on the ability to translate these two-dimensional lines into real-world action, step by step, hour by hour. The map itself represented the era's cutting-edge cartographic technology. Produced by military surveyors using aerial reconnaissance, field reports, and intelligence gathered from prisoners and locals, it attempted to translate complex terrain into readable lines and symbols. Reconnaissance planes, often flying in sub-zero temperatures, captured photographs that informed these charts. Cameras froze, film cracked, and visibility was compromised by clouds and smoke. Yet analysts back at headquarters labored to ensure accuracy. Field units relied on compasses, protractors, and measuring tools to cross-reference the map with real-world distances. Radio communication supplemented visual reconnaissance, but was unreliable in extreme cold. The map became a central hub for technological coordination. Artillery relied on its measurements for targeting, Engineers used it to clear paths and construct temporary bridges, and infantry plotted routes to avoid concealed hazards. Its accuracy was crucial. The smallest discrepancy between charted and actual terrain could render a technologically advanced force vulnerable. Even the paper itself was a technology under strain. Ink bled in snow and rain, folds tore under gloves, and repeated handling weakened edges. Yet it remained indispensable. In a frozen forest where modern technology faltered, a well-drawn map was the most reliable instrument of survival and coordination. Colonel Viktor Petrov, commanding the 45th Infantry Division, carried the weight of thousands of lives on his shoulders. For him, the map was not a static reference. It was a strategic tool, a decision-making framework, and a measure of responsibility. Every line, every ridge, every river bend informed his orders. Petrov had fought in earlier campaigns along the Eastern Front and understood that the margin for error was razor-thin. One miscalculation could cascade into a disaster. Leadership under these conditions required constant judgment. Petrov balanced trust in intelligence with skepticism, weighing conflicting scout reports against the charted terrain. He directed artillery placement, instructed engineers on bridge construction, and coordinated infantry movements, all guided by the map. When subordinate officers questioned ambiguities or discrepancies, he faced difficult choices: delay the advance to verify details, or proceed and risk exposure. The division's cohesion, morale, and survival depended on his ability to read both the map and the battlefield simultaneously. In many ways, the map amplified leadership. It forced Petrov to think several steps ahead, to anticipate enemy maneuvers, and to integrate multiple units into a single operational plan. Every decision reflected a synthesis of human judgment and the charted terrain. The effectiveness of leadership here was inseparable from the accuracy and interpretation of the map. On the opposite side, German forces were acutely aware of the strategic importance of the Donets forest. Reconnaissance and intelligence indicated the Soviet division's planned routes, but the fog, snow, and treacherous terrain complicated their calculations. German commanders relied on intercepted radio traffic, aerial observation, and local informants to anticipate movements. They understood that misjudging the forest topography or underestimating the division's ability to navigate it could open vulnerabilities. The enemy's strategy exploited the very dependence on maps. By placing patrols and concealed machine gun nests along likely axes of advance, they forced the Soviets to interpret terrain cautiously. Any misreading of the map could funnel entire battalions into kill zones. Conversely, accurate map usage allowed the division to bypass traps, anticipate ambushes, and adjust formations. The battle became a contest not just of strength, but of intelligence, observation, and the capacity to convert two-dimensional charts into real-world advantage. The Germans' flexibility and preparedness magnified the stakes. If the 45th Infantry Division misjudged terrain or misinterpreted the map, enemy units could exploit gaps immediately, encircle forward units, and disrupt supply lines. The map's fidelity and the division's ability to act upon it defined the dynamic interplay between opposing forces. For the soldiers, the map exerted a psychological weight as profound as any enemy's shell. Confidence in the chart translated into courage, decisiveness, and cohesion. Doubt fostered hesitation, fragmentation, and fear. Each line carried moral significance. A river might represent safety or isolation. a ridge, a haven, or a death trap. Men carried its implications as much in their minds as on paper. The winter forest amplified this psychological burden. Visibility was poor, distances were deceptive, and every shadow could conceal an enemy rifle. Soldiers trusted the map as a guide and a promise, that following its contours would lead them safely to objectives and back. Rumors of outdated or erroneous intelligence, however, seeded unease. One misplaced hill or frozen ravine could create panic in a unit suddenly cut off from command. Leadership sought to stabilize morale by emphasizing preparation, verification, and adherence to mapped routes. Officers held repeated briefings, pointing out landmarks, confirming coordinates, and distributing annotated copies. Yet the weight of responsibility rested with every soldier's interpretation in real time. Trust in the map became a moral anchor, sustaining men through exhaustion, cold, and the constant presence of death. The line between survival and disaster was as psychological as it was physical, and the map was the fulcrum upon which that balance rested. January 17th, 1943, 9:30 hours. The 45th Infantry Division moved cautiously through the frozen forest, each step measured, each breath visible in the bitter cold. Colonel Petrov led from the command post near a ridge overlooking the valley below, map unfolded across a portable table, edges curling from snow and wind. Scouts reported minor deviations in terrain. A creek had partially frozen, and a small ravine appeared slightly shifted from the charted contours. For Petrov, this was the critical moment. A decision had to be made. Trust the map and advance along the designated route, or adjust based on real-time observation. He chose to trust the map. Orders were issued, repeated down the chain of command, and the division began its advance. Artillery units moved into positions based on mapped coordinates. Infantry squadrons fanned across ridges, and engineers prepared to construct temporary bridges over minor streams. Every action was synchronized, every movement tied to the lines on that fragile sheet of paper. By 10:15, forward units encountered the first test. A ridge that should have been clear, according to the map, concealed a German machine gun nest. Snow muffled the sound of the guns until the first burst tore through the quiet morning, halting the advance. Platoons scrambled for cover, sending urgent messages back to Petrov. The map had predicted ridges, streams, and valleys, but it had not captured the enemy's improvisation. For the soldiers in the front line, the accuracy of the inked contours collided violently with the chaos of reality. Petrov immediately adjusted artillery targeting, relying on pre-planned coordinates to suppress the enemy position. Scouts were dispatched to verify further landmarks ahead, comparing observed terrain with the map's lines. Communication faltered as radio signals crackled and dropped, yet the map provided a reference framework. Officers interpreted the deviations, cross-referencing with known landmarks, and gradually reoriented units to bypass the ambush. At 11 o'clock, another challenge emerged. A partially frozen creek marked clearly on the map as fordable was now blocked by ice and drifted snow. Engineers attempted to create a passage, but delays threatened the entire division's schedule. Petrov consulted the map, instructing units to take a longer route around the obstruction, relying on its other contours to navigate the dense forest safely. The delay created tension as enemy artillery fired intermittently from hidden positions. The soldiers' trust in the map was tested to its limits. By 11:45, the advance reached a critical choke point, a narrow valley flanked by dense woods. According to the map, it was the optimal route to the high ground. In reality, a German reconnaissance patrol had predicted this movement and established an ambush. Troops entering the valley faced sudden fire. The map had not indicated enemy positions, only the contours of the land. Lives hung in the balance, and the division's momentum teetered. Petrov acted decisively, sending a reserve company along an alternative mapped route to flank the ambush. Using the map's secondary paths and terrain features, the company navigated unseen, striking the enemy position from the rear. The coordination required split-second interpretation of the map, combined with real-time observation. Forward units, supported by artillery adjusted through map coordinates, managed to suppress the ambush, allowing the main force to continue its advance. By noon, the division had secured the initial objective, the high ground overlooking the valley. Casualties had been sustained, but the majority of the division remained intact. Every officer knew that this success depended on the careful interplay between map and observation. The map had guided movements, synchronized artillery, and suggested alternative paths, but only human judgment, initiative, and adaptability prevented disaster. The decisive moment had arrived, not in a single confrontation, but in the cumulative chain of decisions dictated by the map. Each deviation from the charted terrain, each unexpected obstacle, tested the division's discipline, cohesion, and trust. The map's contours were no longer abstract lines. They had become the threads holding the entire operation together. Without it, units would have become isolated, supplies delayed, and the enemy would have exploited every weakness. At 12:15, Colonel Petrov surveyed the division's position from the ridge. Snow-covered trees swayed in the wind. Artillery smoke drifted across the valley, and the enemy had temporarily withdrawn. The map lay on the table beside him, scuffed, wet, and frayed, but its lines had guided thousands through chaos. The division's fate, for now, had been preserved by a combination of ink, observation, and human judgment. 12:30 hours. The 45th Infantry Division had gained the ridge, but the battle was far from over. The map, once a guide, now became a tool of survival under fire. German forces, regrouping in the valley below, launched a coordinated counterattack. Tanks maneuvered along concealed paths. Infantry moved through wooded flanks, and machine gun fire cut across the frozen terrain. The challenge was clear. The division's success depended on translating static lines on paper into dynamic battlefield decisions. Petrov summoned his staff to reassess the plan. Using the map, he identified an overlooked secondary route through the eastern forest, a narrow path less exposed to enemy fire. Forward scouts were dispatched to confirm its feasibility. Troops waited, shivering in snow and tension, as artillery units adjusted targeting based on map coordinates. Every minute counted. A miscalculation here could split the division and leave forward units isolated in the valley, exposed to encirclement. At 13:15, reports came in. One battalion had misread a small contour line, diverting slightly off course into a shallow ravine. The error, invisible on the ground in the blizzard-like snowfall, placed them within range of a concealed enemy machine gun nest. Casualties mounted quickly. Officers acted immediately, referencing the map to reroute reinforcements and reposition artillery to cover the trapped unit. The map's contours, combined with disciplined leadership, enabled the division to stabilize the situation. By 1400 hours, the division executed a delicate maneuver. Infantry units advanced along the verified secondary route, flanking the enemy and cutting off their forward reconnaissance units. Tanks supported from positions identified on the map, exploiting elevation contours to minimize exposure while maximizing firepower. The enemy, caught off guard by the unexpected angle of attack, began a gradual withdrawal. The division, though battered, maintained cohesion. Yet the toll was evident. Over 200 men had been killed or wounded, several artillery pieces were damaged, and supplies were dangerously low. The map had not predicted enemy improvisation, hidden ravines, or shifting ice along river crossings. Its value lay not in perfection, but in providing a framework for rapid adaptation under stress. Every decision, every adjustment relied on a combination of map terrain and human observation. 1,500 hours. The ridge was fully secured. Forward scouts reported enemy forces retreating in disarray. The division's position, though costly, now commanded the valley and surrounding forest. Communication lines, though intermittently disrupted, were intact, and supply routes could be re-established along paths verified against the map. Petrov reviewed the operation, noting how a combination of careful planning, accurate mapping, and real-time adaptation had prevented what could have been a catastrophic rout. The pivotal insight emerged slowly but unmistakably. A single map, trusted yet questioned, had determined the division's fate. It had guided movements, informed tactical decisions, coordinated artillery, and allowed leaders to respond decisively to unforeseen obstacles. Without it, the misread ridge, the blocked creek, and the concealed enemy positions might have fractured the division, leaving hundreds exposed and the sector open to enemy exploitation. By late afternoon, the forest quieted, the snow reflecting the waning winter sun. The division regrouped, tending to the wounded, reinforcing positions, and consolidating supply lines. Soldiers, exhausted and frostbitten, now understood the fragile balance that had carried them through the day. The map, tattered, smudged, but accurate enough, had been both guide and shield. Its contours had dictated the movement of thousands, its lines defining the margin between survival and annihilation. As dusk approached, Colonel Petrov stood once more at the ridge, surveying the forest below. The division had survived the day, but the memory of narrow escapes, misread contours, and frozen hazards would linger. The operation, now complete, underscored a singular truth of modern warfare. Intelligence, reconnaissance, and accurate mapping were not auxiliary. They were central to life and death. One sheet of paper, interpreted with skill and caution, had changed the fate of an entire division. The forest fell silent in the wake of the 45th Infantry Division's grueling advance. Snow, once pristine, was now trampled, scorched by artillery fire, and marred with the footprints of battle. Soldiers tended to the wounded, their breaths ragged in the frigid air. Casualties were substantial. Over 200 men killed or wounded, several artillery pieces damaged, and supply lines stretched to the breaking point. Yet, despite the cost, the division had achieved its objective, securing the high ground that controlled the valley below. Reports sent to higher command emphasized the operation's dual lessons: the importance of accurate intelligence and the critical role of leadership in translating maps into actionable strategies. Colonel Petrov's after-action report highlighted the division's reliance on the map, noting where its accuracy prevented disaster and where minor discrepancies forced rapid adaptation. "The map was our lifeline," he wrote. "Its lines dictated movement, coordinated artillery, and informed decisions. Without it, the division's integrity would have been compromised and our position lost." The human toll extended beyond the battlefield. Soldiers who had survived faced frostbite, exhaustion, and trauma from exposure to artillery, machine gun fire, and the psychological strain of near misses. For many, the map represented both salvation and reminder of vulnerability. Forward units that had navigated ambushes and blocked routes carried vivid memories of how a single misread contour could have led to annihilation. The winter forest, once neutral terrain, had become a crucible where survival depended on observation, judgment, and adherence to mapped guidance. Strategically, securing the high ground shifted the balance in the region. The German forces, though still active in surrounding areas, were forced to redirect their armored units and patrols to compensate for the division's newly fortified positions. Artillery and supply lines along the Donets corridor could now operate with reduced interference, allowing for a more secure defensive posture in the coming weeks. The map's role in these outcomes was explicit. It had guided movements, indicated defensible positions, and facilitated the coordination of combined arms under adverse conditions. The operation also revealed systemic limitations. Supply lines, fragile even under ideal conditions, had been stretched dangerously thin. The partially frozen creek, minor ravines, and shifting snow drifts complicated both advance and retreat, forcing engineers to improvise under fire. Communication disruptions underscored the challenge of relying on radio and messenger systems in sub-zero temperatures. These realities, documented in after-action reports, prompted discussions at headquarters regarding the integration of more precise cartographic data, enhanced reconnaissance, and contingency planning for extreme environments. For historians and military analysts, the 17th of January became a case study in the interplay between terrain, intelligence, and leadership. The division's survival and success could be traced directly to how commanders and soldiers interpreted the map, verified conditions in real time, and adjusted tactics accordingly. It underscored the concept that maps in warfare were not passive instruments. They were active determinants of operational success. A single sheet of paper, in this case, had preserved the fighting capacity of an entire division in one of the harshest winter environments of the Eastern Front. Yet beyond reports and statistics, the aftermath carried a subtler, psychological dimension. Survivors understood that luck had played a role alongside skill. Minor errors had been corrected, deviations managed, and hazards mitigated. The map had not guaranteed success. Human judgment had converted its guidance into tangible results. Soldiers would carry this lesson into future operations, trusting in intelligence while remaining alert to its limits. As evening descended over the snow-covered ridge, the division regrouped. Tents were pitched where terrain allowed, fires lit to thaw frozen hands and weapons, and the wounded stabilized for evacuation. The map, now battered, smudged, and torn at the edges, remained at the center of command. Its significance had been proven. Without it, the day's outcome could have been drastically different. With the immediate objectives secured, the division could consolidate, replenish, and prepare for the next challenge. In the days following the operation, the 45th Infantry Division consolidated its positions along the ridge. Engineers repaired damaged bridges, cleared paths blocked by snow and ice, and reinforced defensive works along vulnerable points. Supplies arrived slowly but steadily, guided once again by the map's verified routes. The division's success had not only preserved lives, but also allowed for the stabilization of the broader sector. The enemy, having suffered losses and been forced to withdraw, recalculated its maneuvers, ceding temporary control of the high ground. Military reports emphasized the operation's unique lessons. Headquarters recognized that while numerical strength and firepower were critical, intelligence and terrain comprehension were decisive. A single sheet of paper, the map, had determined the division's movements, highlighted safe routes, and allowed leaders to anticipate obstacles and enemy positions. Misinterpretations of even minor details earlier in the operation had nearly caused disaster, underscoring the thin line between victory and catastrophe. Officers began drafting updated protocols to integrate reconnaissance data more rigorously with mapped intelligence, ensuring that future operations could reduce reliance on chance and human memory. The experience left a profound imprint on soldiers and commanders alike. Letters from men in the field described the psychological weight of navigating unknown terrain with only a map to guide them. One sergeant recounted how he memorized key contour lines and stream crossings, carrying the knowledge in his mind as much as on paper, aware that a single misstep could be fatal. Officers reflected in their diaries on the burden of decision-making, balancing trust in intelligence against instinct and first-hand observation. The operation became an enduring example of the delicate interplay between planning and adaptability in wartime. Strategically, the division's position strengthened the command's ability to control the Donets corridor. German forces were forced to reroute armored units and reposition patrols, temporarily reducing pressure on adjacent sectors. Artillery could now operate with fewer obstructions, and reconnaissance patrols were able to explore territory previously inaccessible due to enemy presence. The map's effectiveness was reinforced. Its lines guided the coordination of multiple units across diverse terrain, demonstrating that in modern warfare, information could be as lethal as tanks or rifles. The operation also prompted broader institutional changes. Lessons from the battle were incorporated into training programs, emphasizing map reading, terrain interpretation, and contingency planning. Commanders studied the operation in staff colleges, analyzing how small errors in contour interpretation could have led to the division's decimation. Cartographers and intelligence officers refined methods for producing more accurate maps under field conditions, ensuring that future divisions could navigate complex terrain with greater confidence. The event highlighted a critical truth. The map was not merely a passive tool, but an active determinant of operational outcomes. By the end of January 1943, the 45th Infantry Division had stabilized its front, secured supply lines, and integrated lessons from the operation into daily practice. Soldiers moved with a heightened awareness of terrain. Leadership made decisions informed by both maps and real-time observation, and command protocols evolved to incorporate verification procedures for reconnaissance data. The operation's legacy endured, illustrating that warfare was not only about firepower or numbers, but about the precise combination of intelligence, terrain, and human judgment. Ultimately, the division had survived because it had respected the map's guidance while remaining vigilant to its limitations. A single misread contour line, a frozen creek, or an obscured ridge could have spelled disaster. The operation demonstrated that in the unforgiving winter forests of the Eastern Front, Success was determined as much by knowledge and adaptability as by courage and strength. The map had shaped every decision, every maneuver, and every life, proving that in warfare, even the smallest sheet of paper could wield extraordinary influence. The events of January 17th, 1943, stand as a stark reminder of the fragile interplay between human judgment, intelligence, and the unforgiving realities of war. For the 45th Infantry Division, survival hinged on a single sheet of paper, its inked lines and contour symbols acting as both guide and lifeline. Yet the map alone could not secure victory. It required disciplined officers, alert soldiers, and the capacity to adapt when the terrain defied expectation. In that frozen forest, the map became more than a tool. It became a nexus where strategy, technology, and human experience converged. It dictated movement, informed tactical choices, and provided a framework for coordination under extreme conditions. It also exposed vulnerability. Minor errors or misreadings threatened catastrophe, illustrating how fragile operational plans could be when faced with uncertainty. The psychological weight on every soldier, the burden on leadership, and the constant vigilance required in hostile terrain revealed the human dimension of intelligence. Beyond the immediate survival of the division, the episode underscores a broader truth about warfare. Information shapes destiny. Maps, reconnaissance reports, and intelligence are instruments that can amplify strength or magnify weakness. Success is rarely determined solely by numbers or firepower. It emerges from the precise alignment of knowledge, judgment, and action. In this sense, the map that guided the 45th Infantry Division embodies the silent, often overlooked forces that define history. As snow settled over the ridge and the forest grew quiet once more, the lessons endured. Soldiers would carry memories of frozen creeks, hidden ravines, and ambushes avoided by the narrowest of margins. Commanders would refine procedures, cartographers would improve accuracy, and future divisions would benefit from the experience. The map had changed the fate of a division, but more than that, it had revealed the enduring truth of war. Survival belongs not just to the strong or the brave, but to those who can read the world and its uncertainties with both eyes open. In the end, a single sheet of paper had shaped history, guiding men through snow, steel, and fire, and leaving a lesson that would echo far beyond the forested hills of the Donets.